On a cold autumn morning, three teens thought it would be funny to mock an elderly blind man at a bus stop, laughing at his cane, his glasses, his silence. But Daniel Cross wasn't just any man. With one quiet movement, he reached into his coat and pulled out something that stopped them cold. Not a weapon, but a piece of history they could never have imagined. By the time the bus arrived, the boys were no longer laughing, and the lesson they learned would follow them for the rest of their lives. What was in his hand, and why did it change everything? Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and diesel fumes as Daniel Cross stood at the corner of Main and Alder, the spot where the number 12 bus made its morning stop. The air had the sharp edge of October, cold enough that his breath came out in pale bursts. He wore the same army-issue coat he had pulled on for years, its faded olive fabric soft at the elbows, the brass buttons dull but intact. The collar was turned up against the chill, and his gloved hands rested lightly on the curved handle of his white cane. His dark glasses hid the eyes he no longer used, but his head was angled slightly toward the sound of approaching footsteps, the shuffling rhythm of sneakers on pavement. He could hear the teenagers before he could place them. Their voices were low at first, carrying the quick cadence of inside jokes, then sharper bursts of laughter. The sound wasn't just idle chatter. It had an edge to it, the kind that was meant to be overheard. One voice, higher and impatient, muttered something about old guys in war coats, and the others chuckled. The wind shifted, bringing their words closer. They were standing just far enough away to pretend they weren't talking about him, but close enough to make sure he knew they were. Daniel kept his chin level, his expression unchanged. He had learned long ago that silence could be a kind of armor. The tapping of his cane against the sidewalk kept a slow, steady rhythm. Behind the lenses of his glasses, he focused on the world through sound. The hum of the streetlight overhead, the low rumble of a truck idling somewhere up the block, the dry scrape of leaves being pushed along by the wind. The teenagers shifted positions, the shuffle of their feet on the concrete telling him they were edging closer. One of them kicked at the metal pole of the bus stop sign, sending a hollow clang into the air. It was followed by a snicker, then a muttered comment about fake blind guys that carried just enough for him to catch. He let the words pass over him, the way he had learned to let artillery noise pass years ago, registering it, but not letting it take root. His grip on the cane didn't tighten. His posture didn't change. A car passed, its tires hissing on the damp pavement. Daniel turned his head slightly toward the sound, then let it drift away. He could tell the bus was still a few minutes off. The faint, distant growl of its engine hadn't reached him yet. He heard one of the boys whisper something about the stick, and the others laughed again. They were testing the waters, seeing if they could draw a reaction. In the back of his mind, he measured the weight of the moment. These were kids, no older than 17 by the sound of them. But their voices carried the casual cruelty that came when someone thought the world was theirs to judge. He had met that tone before, in places far from this quiet New England street. It had worn different faces back then, but it had always been the same. He shifted his feet slightly, adjusting his stance so that the heel of his left boot rested on a crack in the sidewalk. The wind pushed against his coat, the fabric moving just enough to brush against the outline of something in the inside pocket. He kept his right hand on the cane, its tip resting against the curb's edge. The steady contact grounded him. A city bus passed on the opposite side of the street, its brakes hissing, and one of the teens muttered about how slow the number 12 always was. Their voices dipped, but Daniel could feel the attention still on him, like heat on the side of his face. He imagined their eyes moving from the glasses to the coat to the worn leather boots that had been polished not for appearance but for habit. Somewhere farther down the street, a door closed and a pair of footsteps quickened to catch the bus. The sound didn't belong to the teens. It was lighter, sharper, and moving at a faster pace. Daniel tilted his head toward it, registering the small shift in the air as another person approached the stop. The teenagers' laughter dulled a little. Their whispers lowered. Daniel let the quiet stretch out, his presence unshaken. Years in the service had taught him how to stand still and let the weight of silence work in his favor. It wasn't a performance. It was survival, and in moments like this, it was also a choice. The bus was still a couple minutes away. He would wait for it, just as he always did, cane in hand, the world unfolding in sound and scent around him, unbothered by the boys' attempts to define him. The morning would go on, and so would he. The laughter was no longer just a background noise. It was deliberate now, each burst sharper than the last, cutting to the cold morning air. Daniel heard the scrape of sneakers as the boys shifted their stance, angling their bodies toward him. They weren't speaking in the quick, conspiratorial tones of friends anymore. Their voices had slowed, words drawn out so they would carry. A comment about his dark glasses floated over first. Something about how they made him look like he thought he was in a spy movie. Another voice chimed in, laughing, and added something about the cane, wondering aloud if it was just for show. Daniel kept his face turned toward the street, though he could picture the scene without seeing it. The exaggerated gestures, the sideways glances to make sure he heard, the half-smirks tugging at their mouths. He had been in enough small-town bus stops to know this dance. It was a kind where onlookers pretended not to notice, their eyes flicking over just long enough to register what was happening before moving on. The footsteps of a woman in heeled boots approached from behind, then slowed as she passed. He could feel her glance in his direction, a moment of hesitation, but she kept going. A man with a coffee cup and a newspaper under his arm crossed the street without looking up. The sound of a delivery truck's back door slamming shut punctuated the air, and even the driver's eyes slid away as he climbed into the cab. No one wanted to get involved. No one ever did in moments like this. The boys' laughter rose again, closer now. He could smell the faint trace of gum and cheap cologne as one of them stepped into the edge of his space. Their shoes scuffed the pavement deliberately, the rhythm meant to be noticed. One voice, deeper than the rest, asked in mock politeness if he could even see the bus coming or if he just guessed where to stand. The others laughed, their amusement bouncing off the brick wall of the corner store behind him. Daniel adjusted his grip on the cane, not in defense, but to keep the tip balanced against the sidewalk's edge. The smooth arc of the handle rested in his palm, a familiar weight. He had learned long ago that the most unnerving thing to someone looking for a reaction was to give them nothing. The silence that followed his non-response seemed to make the boys lean in even more. A gust of wind rattled the bus stop sign, the thin metal vibrating with a hollow hum. Somewhere in the distance, the low drone of the number 12's engine whispered against the edges of his hearing. Still a few blocks away. The boys didn't hear it. They were too focused on their sport. Another comment landed, a lazy, almost sing-song observation about how maybe he wasn't even blind at all. Maybe it was just a trick to get sympathy. The idea made them laugh harder, their voices bouncing between them like a ball. Daniel could sense movement around them. The morning's flow of commuters, store owners unlocking doors, and the occasional car rolling past. The world was moving as it always did. But here on this corner, the moment had slowed into something contained, small and sour. The sound of the boys' laughter wasn't loud enough to stop the day, but it was loud enough to settle in the chest of anyone who actually heard it. He knew how easily that sound could linger long after the moment passed. He shifted his weight slightly, letting his boots grind against a gritty sidewalk, the faint crunch catching their attention. He didn't turn toward them. Instead, he lifted his chin just enough to face the direction of the sun, letting the warmth touch his cheek. Years of practice had taught him the subtle art of not letting them know they had landed a blow. The comment about the cane came again, this time from the one who seemed to enjoy playing leader, his tone louder, as if he were performing for a wider audience. A bus hissed to a stop on the opposite side of the street, the sound pulling the attention of a few pedestrians. The distraction was brief. The boys' focus returned quickly, their words threading between them like a private joke they wanted him to overhear. Daniel kept his breathing slow, steady, and even. He knew this kind of behavior thrived on attention, and he had no interest in feeding it. Still, the edge in their voices told him this wasn't quite over. There was always a moment when taunting turned into testing, and he could feel that shift beginning in the weight of the air around him. The number 12 was closer now. He could hear it, but so were they. The crosswalk signal clicked over to green, its mechanical voice announcing it was safe to walk, but the young woman on the opposite curb didn't move. She stood with a reusable grocery bag hooked over one arm, her other hand wrapped around a paper coffee cup that had long since stopped steaming. The morning sun hit her from behind, casting her shadow across the cracked pavement in front of the small bakery where she had stopped moments earlier. She had been on her way to work, her mind still on the email she needed to send, when the sound of the boys' laughter cut through the idle hum of Main Street. It wasn't the easy laughter of friends sharing a joke. It had that sharpness, that lilt of cruelty she recognized from high school hallways. Her gaze found the source quickly enough. 3 boys in hoodies and sneakers clustered at the bus stop across the street, their bodies angling toward the older man standing a little apart from them. Even from this distance, she could see the slight forward tilt of their shoulders, the way their heads leaned in just enough to make sure he heard whatever they were saying. The man stood still, his white cane resting at the edge of the curb, the tip pointed slightly toward the street. His head turned occasionally, not with the aimless scanning of someone lost in thought, but with the small, purposeful adjustments of someone who relied on sound to track the world. The woman's stomach tightened. She had never seen him before, but there was something about his stance, quiet, composed, unmoving, that made the boys' behavior seem all the more out of place. The sound of their laughter floated across the traffic between them, carried by a gap in passing cars. It was loud enough now that a man pushing a stroller glanced over before quickly looking away. Another pedestrian, an older woman with a scarf wrapped tightly under her chin, caught part scene and gave a fleeting frown before continuing past. The young woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other, torn between the pull to intervene and the instinct to stay out of whatever was unfolding. She could feel that familiar hesitation creeping in, the quick, self-protective thoughts that sprang up in moments like this. It's probably not as bad as it looks. Maybe they know each other. Someone else will say something. She took a sip from her coffee, though it had gone lukewarm, just to buy herself another moment. The light changed again, the traffic slowing to let people cross. She stayed rooted on the curb, her eyes on the man's unmoving back. The boys laughed again, louder now, and one of them gestured dramatically, the movement wide enough for her to catch it from where she stood. The man didn't respond. He simply kept his face turned toward the street, as though listening for something beyond their voices. The young woman realized she was gripping her coffee cup harder than before. A delivery van rolled to a stop at the intersection, its engine rumbling as the driver waited for a turn. The noise filled the space between the two sides of the street, muting the boys for a moment, but when it moved on, their laughter returned, closer in tone, almost circling him now. She caught sight of the white cane shifting slightly in his grip, the motion measured and controlled. It wasn't fear, she thought, but there was a weight to it. Another man in a work jacket passed by on the opposite sidewalk, glancing briefly at the group before continuing without breaking stride. She felt her pulse tick up at the ease with which people seemed to look away. She wondered if that was how it happened most of the time, these small cruelties surviving not because no one noticed, but because everyone convinced themselves it was someone else's place to act. Her grocery bag slipped slightly on her arm, the weight of apples and bread shifting inside. She adjusted it without thinking, still watching. The man's coat caught a brief glint of sunlight, the kind that comes off old, worn fabric that's been through more years than it looks like it should have survived. Something in that detail caught her, held her in place. She told herself she'd cross if things went further. She'd speak up if one of them stepped in front of him, or if the tone shifted from taunting to something sharper. But for now, she stood still, the cold creeping through her shoes, eyes fixed on a scene that was already pressing against her conscience. Somewhere far down the street, a bus engine's low growl was working its way closer, but from here, the sound of laughter still carried louder. The boys' laughter drifted in and out with the rise and fall of traffic noise, but Daniel didn't let it touch him. He shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, letting the motion travel through his shoulders and down his arm until the cane in his hand came to life with a quiet, deliberate tap against the edge of the curb. The sound was soft enough to be almost lost under the rumble of a passing bus across the street, yet carried a kind precision that made it distinct, a crisp, measured beat in the cool morning air. He had learned a long time ago that rhythm could do more than guide a step. It could steady the mind. Out there years ago, when visibility was reduced to noise and instinct, steady movement was a lifeline. You didn't freeze when the air got tense. You moved with intent, however small. Now, in this quieter kind of standoff, The principle still held. The cane tapped once, twice, then paused, the tip resting lightly in the groove where pavement met stone. Behind him, the wind tugged at the hem of his coat, the fabric brushing against his legs in a slow, restless sweep. He could hear the faint metallic rattle of the bus stop sign in that same wind, a reminder of the stillness he was choosing to hold. The boys didn't understand that kind of stillness. To them, silence meant submission. To him, it was the ground he stood on. One of them said something about his magic stick, the words wrapped in the kind of humor that won an audience. The others snickered, their voices overlapping as they built on each other's jokes. Daniel's head tilted just slightly, not toward them, but toward the street where a distant diesel engine hummed in the direction he expected the number 12 to come from. The tapping resumed, steady, deliberate, like a metronome that refused to break tempo no matter how the room changed. He heard the shuffling of feet as they shifted closer again, the scrape of rubber soles on concrete mixing with the low hum of a nearby street lamp. Their movements had a certain restlessness to them, like a dog testing the length of its leash, unsure whether it was brave enough to step all the way forward. Each tap of his cane marked a moment in which they didn't quite cross that invisible line. A gust pushed a dry leaf against his boot, the faint rasp of it sliding away marking the change in air. He kept the cane in motion, tap, lift, settle, its arc small but unwavering. He could almost feel the sound of it. It traveled up the aluminum shaft and into his palm, grounding him more than the sidewalk beneath his feet ever could. It was a language of its own, one the boys weren't meant to understand, but they felt it just enough to know they weren't in control of this moment. Somewhere across the street, a car door slammed and the rhythm of the town moved on. People walked past on both sidewalks, their shoes clicking or shuffling depending on their pace, their heads turned toward shop windows or the glow of phone screens. He knew some of them had seen what was happening, could feel their hesitation in the air, but they kept going. That was fine. This wasn't about calling for help. This was about reminding himself that their words, however loud, couldn't dictate his movements. The boys muttered something else, lower now, their voices carrying the faint note of irritation that creeps in when mockery doesn't land. The tapping didn't change. It wasn't defiance in the theatrical sense. There was no performance in it. It was simply the refusal to give them the reaction they were circling for. The curb's edge was familiar under the tip of the cane, each tap marking a precise point in space as constant as the beat of a clock. He adjusted his footing again, not out of unease, but to give the muscles in his back a break from standing so long in the same position. The cane's next tap landed with the same unhurried weight, its sound almost swallowed by the whoosh of a delivery truck passing close to the curb. When the truck was gone, the rhythm remained, steady as it had been from the start. It was the kind of steadiness that belonged to someone who'd already faced far worse than this. Someone who knew that you don't always have to push back with force. Sometimes you just have to remain exactly where you are and let the noise pass around you. And so Daniel stayed, the cane lifting and landing in a rhythm only he needed to understand, waiting for the bus and letting the morning play itself out. The scrape of sneakers on the pavement came first, quick and deliberate, followed by the sudden absence of the cane's familiar weight in Daniel's hand. His palm closed on air, the shift so fast that his fingers were still curling as the tallest boy's voice rose in mock triumph. A chorus of laughter followed, rough and unrestrained this time, no longer confined to snide remarks thrown from a distance. The cane whistled faintly through the air as it was waved like a baton, the aluminum shaft catching the light in flashes Daniel could not see, but could hear in a way the movement cut through space. The boys' amusement swelled at the sight. One of them clapped sharply, the sound close enough that Daniel knew they had formed a loose half-circle around him. Another imitated the tapping sound, stomping the toe of his sneaker against the curb in exaggerated beats, each one followed by a burst of laughter. The tallest voice carried above the rest, announcing mock commands like conductor to an invisible orchestra. The aluminum clicked faintly against the asphalt, an unfamiliar sound to Daniel, who had known that cane only by its gentle contact with the ground. He didn't move toward them. Instead, he let the noise unfold, listening for the details within it. The way the tallest boy's breath came quicker now, the sound of his hand sliding against the smooth shaft as he adjusted his grip, the faint rattle of the cane's joint where it folded for storage. Those details told Daniel more than their laughter could. This wasn't a single impulsive act. It was an escalation, the kind that comes when a group senses they can push without consequence. From across the street, a car honked at a driver who had drifted too far into the crosswalk. The interruption was brief, the laughter resuming almost before the echo had faded. Daniel could feel their attention on him, the anticipation for a reaction hanging thick in the cold air. A gust of wind brushed against his face, carrying the smell of gasoline from a passing truck, and he took in a slow breath, letting it steady him. He turned his head slightly toward the sound of the cane in motion, gauging distance and direction. It was maybe 4 steps to the boy holding it, though the exact placement would shift as he paraded it back and forth for the others. The aluminum's lightness in their hands was nothing like the steady weight it carried in his own, but it was enough for them to feel bold. They didn't understand what it was to rely on something so completely that it became more than a tool. They didn't understand that taking was not just a joke, but a theft of balance, orientation, and, if he let them, dignity. One of the others tried out a blind man impression, stumbling a few exaggerated steps and calling out in a fake, wavering voice. The others erupted again, their sneakers scuffing the sidewalk as they shifted to keep watching the performance. Daniel listened to the rhythm of their movement, noting where their weight fell, how their sneakers squeaked slightly on a damp patch near the curb. He stayed rooted where he was, not out of helplessness, but because stillness was its own kind of reply. For a moment, the tallest boy seemed almost puzzled by his lack of response. The baton twirl slowed, the metallic swish giving way to a few idle taps on the pavement. Daniel could feel the change in the air, the slight hesitation that came when someone realized they weren't getting the reaction they'd expected. That pause was short-lived. The boy tapped the cane against the bus stop sign in a loud, metallic clatter, drawing the attention of a man walking a dog a block away. The man glanced over, slowed for a moment, then kept walking. Daniel shifted his stance slightly, angling 1 foot forward, his ears tracking the sound of the cane's movement. He could tell the boy had stepped closer again, the air shifting with the movement of his arm as he swung it. Still, Daniel's face remained neutral, his voice silent. He let them fill the space with their noise, because noise was all they had. And while they made it, he was listening, not just to the sound of his cane being passed around like a prop, but to the ragged edges in their laughter that suggested they didn't fully understand what they had started. Somewhere in the distance, the familiar growl of the number 12 bus's engine began to creep into his awareness. It was still a ways off, but the low, steady note of it threaded through the sharp bursts of the boy's amusement. The sound was a reminder that this moment, like all moments, would pass. The cane would be back in his hand, and when it was, he would decide what to do next. For now, he stood still, letting their voices run in circles while he listened for the shape of what was coming. The clatter of the cane against the bus stop sign rang out again, metal on metal, sharp and mocking. It was a kind of noise meant to irritate, to provoke, to make someone snap. Daniel didn't give them that satisfaction. He let the sound settle into the air and fade, the way you let distant thunder roll past without quickening your pace. His breathing stayed even. The muscles in his shoulders remained loose, his fingers resting lightly against the seam of his coat. The absence of reaction was its own kind of presence, calm, deliberate, unshaken. He shifted his stance, the movement slow and precise, one boot sliding half an inch forward until it found the familiar groove in the curb. The subtle change brought his weight into balance. The wind caught the edge of his coat and pressed it gently against his side. He tilted his head slightly, as though turning an ear toward the laughter that continued to circle him, but there was no irritation in the gesture. Only the quiet focus of a man taking stock. The tallest boy tried again, this time striking the cane against the pavement, making it skip and bounce, so the sound would pop in irregular bursts. The others responded with whoops and claps, the air around them thick with the thrill of having an audience, even if the only one watching closely was their target. Daniel kept his face turned toward the street, the pale light of morning brushing against the lenses of his glasses. "Hey, old man," one of them called out, his tone pitched high in mock friendliness. "You need this back?" A burst of laughter followed before Daniel could respond, the kind that feeds on itself, needing no real punchline. He could have answered in a dozen ways, most of them sharp enough to land. He could have stepped forward, reached out, and reclaimed what was his. But he didn't. Instead, his voice, when it finally came, was level and quiet, carrying no tremor of anger. "Careful with that," he said, each word distinct. Not a threat, not a plea, just a simple instruction, spoken with the weight of someone used to being listened to when he chose to speak. The laughter dipped for a moment, caught off guard by the tone. The tallest boy recovered quickly, spinning the cane once in his hand and chuckling, but the pause was there, small and telling. Daniel heard it as clearly as he heard the soft slap of a shoe against the wet edge of the curb. From across the street, the woman with the grocery bag still stood in place, watching. She had seen enough to know it was more than teasing now, though her feet remained rooted to the opposite sidewalk. A man in a windbreaker walked past her, following her gaze, then shook his head and kept moving. The world was full of observers and almost interveners. Daniel adjusted his footing again, the motion controlled, like a boxer shifting in the ring to find a stronger position. The air around him was cool and still except for the restless movement of the boys. He could track them by sound alone, the faint rustle of a sleeve brushing against another, the uneven rhythm of their sneakers as they shifted from one position to another. One of them muttered something under his breath, too low for Daniel to catch, and the others laughed again, but not quite as easily as before. His calm had settled into the space between them, filling it with something they hadn't expected. It was harder to laugh at a man who refused to be pulled into the rhythm you set. A gust of wind passed through, carrying the scent of exhaust and something faintly sweet from a bakery down the block. Daniel kept his face angled toward the sound of the street, waiting. He could hear the bus now, still distant, but distinct in the way the engine's hum pushed against the air. The timing was on his side. The tallest boy tapped the cane against his own shoe, a dull thud, as if trying to reclaim the mood. Daniel didn't flinch. His voice stayed calm, the same measured tone as before when he spoke again, this time softer. "It's not a toy." The words were unhurried, unadorned, spoken as if they were a fact too obvious to debate. Their laughter faltered just enough for the sound of the approaching bus to rise above it. Daniel stood as he had from the beginning, still, balanced, and quiet, holding the kind of silence that doesn't come from having nothing to say, but from knowing that sometimes saying less is what lands the hardest. The cane would come back. The moment would pass. But they would remember the man who met mockery not with fury, but with a steadiness they couldn't shake. The cane clicked once more against the concrete as the tallest boy swung it in a lazy arc, the sound stretching into the cold air between bursts of laughter. Daniel stood rooted in his place, the wind tugging at the hem of his coat, his head angled just enough to keep track of where the movement was coming from. His breath came steady, slow, his boots planted in a way that said he wasn't planning to move until he chose to. When he spoke, the words slipped out with no rush, no bark, and no trace of pleading. "Give it back." Just 3 syllables, but they landed with a weight that didn't match the volume. There was no threat curled in the tone, no raised edge to push them back. It was simply an instruction, one that assumed it would be followed because that's how Daniel Cross had lived most of his life. The response was not compliance. The tallest boy threw his head back and let out a sharp laugh, the kind that carries across an open street. "Oh, did you hear that?" he called to the others, his voice high with mock drama. "Give it back," he repeated in a theatrical imitation of Daniel's tone, dragging the words out until they lost all shape. The 2 others jumped in immediately, parroting the phrase back and forth, layering it with exaggerated politeness and mocking bows Daniel could hear in the swish of their movement. Their laughter rolled together, sharper now, the sound of boys who found a vein to tap and intended to keep it open. They passed the cane between them like a baton, each new handoff punctuated by a cheer or a clap. Somewhere in the back of it, Daniel caught the faint, hesitant sound of someone's shoe dragging against the sidewalk. Uncertain, maybe even uneasy, but it was drowned by the noise the others were making. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He let the air between them settle again, holding it for a beat longer than they expected. The calm in his stillness was different from before. It carried a thin thread of command that didn't need volume to be heard. The laughter stuttered for just a moment, though they tried to cover it quickly with more noise. A car rolled past, tires hissing on the damp road, and in that small break from their jeers, Daniel tilted his head, angling one ear toward the tallest boy. His posture didn't change much, but the shift was enough to give the impression that he was now listening with absolute focus, each sound cataloged and measured. "You don't want to keep that," he said, his voice low again, almost conversational. They laughed harder at that, twisting his words into another performance of themselves. One boy began tapping the cane on the curb in an uneven rhythm, pretending to play a drum. The tallest added a whistle, off-key and loud. Passers-by kept moving, their glances brief and quickly redirected, as if the moment wasn't theirs to enter. Across the street, the young woman with the grocery bag still hadn't moved on. She shifted her weight, her hand tightening on the handle of the bag, eyes fixed on the uneven circle forming around the older man. The cold breeze caught her hair and pulled it across her cheek, but she didn't brush it away. Daniel let the next few seconds play out without interruption, the sound of the cane in foreign hands registering in the same way a soldier notes the unfamiliar rattle of a weapon being handled by someone who doesn't know its worth. His voice came again, quiet and level, the same words as before, though this time they seemed to land heavier for having been repeated without change. "Give it back." The tallest boy spun the cane once in his grip, slow his movements just enough for Daniel to hear the shift in the air. The laughter around him wavered. It wasn't surrender, not yet, but the tone was edging toward something different. The rhythm of the street beyond them carried on. Cars passing, a door shutting somewhere down the block. But in the space they occupied, the noise had become its own closed loop. Daniel's hand stayed at his sides, his shoulders square, his presence unbroken. Whether they gave it back now or 10 seconds from now, the balance of the moment had begun to change, and he could feel it turning in the way the air tightened around their voices. The bus engine was closer. The cane would be his again. And when it was, they'd remember not the words, but the way he said them. The laughter hung in the cold air, uneven now, as if they weren't sure whether to keep pushing or brace for something else. Daniel stood without moving for a long moment, the quiet between their taunts stretching just enough to make them notice it. The wind shifted, sliding under the edge of his collar, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt coffee from the cafe up the block. His boots stayed planted, but his right hand moved slowly, deliberately, until it slipped beneath the fold of his coat. The motion wasn't hurried. It had the unshakable steadiness of someone who knew exactly where his hand was going and exactly what waited for him there. His fingers found an inside pocket, brushing the rough seam at the edge before curling around a cool shape tucked deep inside. The metal was small enough to fit his palm, smooth in some places, ridged in others, its weight familiar in a way nothing else was. The boys noticed immediately. The tallest, still holding the cane, shifted it to one hand so he could gesture toward Daniel with the other. "What's he doing?" he called out to his friends, his voice cutting across the street like a challenge. One of them laughed, but the sound was different now, shorter, less certain. The other muttered something under his breath that Daniel couldn't catch, his tone muffled by the cold. Daniel kept his head level, the lenses of his glasses reflecting a pale slice of the winter light. His grip on the object inside his coat was firm but not clenched, the way you hold on to something that doesn't need force to stay in your possession. He didn't raise his voice or give him the satisfaction of an explanation. Silence, he knew, could be louder than anything else. The street seemed to take on a strange pause. A car idled at the intersection, the hum of its engine steady but muted. Footsteps passed somewhere behind him, quick and light, their rhythm changing as the walker noticed the scene and chose a wider path. Across the street, the woman with the grocery bag had stopped shifting her weight. Her eyes stayed locked on the older man with his hand in his coat, her own body tightening as if preparing for something she couldn't quite name. The tallest boy's voice came again, pitched higher now, mockery straining to cover curiosity. "What? You got something in there, old man?" His friends gave a weak laugh in response, but it came a second too late to sound convincing. The cane clicked faintly as it shifted in his grip, the sound a reminder that it still wasn't in Daniel's hand. Daniel's fingers traced the edge of the object's surface, finding the worn groove he knew by touch alone. It was an anchor in his palm, grounding him in a way the noise around him could not shake. He could feel their attention narrowing, the way boys' eyes tend to focus when they're unsure if they've crossed a line. He didn't rush. He let them wait. The wind rattled the bus stop sign again, a hollow metallic vibration, that seemed louder in the absence of their earlier jeers. Somewhere far down the street, the engine of the number 12 murmured against the cold, closing the distance. Daniel shifted his stance slightly, the faint crunch of grit under his boot marking the movement. His left hand remained loose at his side, his right still in the coat pocket, holding the metal object with the same steady patience that had carried him through far worse than this. The tallest boy adjusted his grip on the cane, the twirl slowing, his voice losing its earlier volume. "Seriously, what is it?" he asked, and this time it sounded almost genuine. Daniel didn't answer. He let the question hang there unanswered, while the bus's low growl came closer, its brakes beginning to sigh against the road. When he finally moved, it was with the same calm precision as before, no sudden gestures, no wasted motion. His fingers curled more fully around the metal, feeling its familiar weight as if reminding himself why he kept it with him. The cold morning pressing on all of them, but in the space between his stillness and their unease, the balance of the moment began to tilt. Whatever happened next, the noise would no longer be theirs alone. The shift was subtle, almost invisible to anyone passing by, but Daniel felt it in the air. The chatter that had been constant a moment earlier thinned, the laughter breaking apart into short, uneven bursts that didn't quite carry the same confidence. The tallest boy, still holding the cane, slowed the motion of his hand, the aluminum no longer slicing through the air in showy arcs. The other two hung back half a step, their sneakers scuffing lightly against the sidewalk, as if they weren't sure whether to lean in closer or put some distance between themselves and the man in front of them. It wasn't fear, not yet, but it was something. Curiosity had crept in, threading itself through the edges of their smirks. The kind of curiosity that made their eyes sharpen, their posture shift, as they tried to figure out if the older man's hand inside his coat meant anything more than a slow, deliberate adjustment against the morning chill. Daniel kept his hand where it was, fingers resting on the small metal object as if it belonged there. He didn't turn toward them, didn't offer explanation or warning. The calm in his stance was the same as before, but the silence now carried a new weight, the kind that fills a room when everyone realizes they just stepped into a moment they don't fully understand. The street around them went on with its rhythm. A bus rumbled somewhere in the distance, brakes hissing faintly as it made a stop 2 blocks away. A dog barked once, sharp and quick, from an apartment above the bakery. The wind cut between the buildings, stirring dry leaves into brief spirals at the edge of the curb. All of it moved as it always did, but for the boys, that motion seemed muffled. Their attention had tightened into a narrow circle that excluded everything but the man with his hand in his coat. The tallest boy glanced at his friends, and Daniel caught the sound of a shoe pivoting on grit as one of them shifted uneasily. They were still smirking, still wearing the same loose expressions they had worn since the first joke, but the timing was off now. Their laughter came a beat too late, their comments dropping into the air without quite landing. Across the street, the woman with the grocery bag hadn't moved on. She was standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the group, the strap of the bag pulled tight in her hand. She tilted her head slightly, as though trying to read the space between them, and Daniel imagined she could feel that same hesitation in the air. He let the moment stretch, holding the stillness without forcing it. Sometimes you didn't have to speak to be heard. Sometimes the absence of a reaction was enough to press against the noise until it broke apart on its own. His grip on the object in his coat was loose but certain, a quiet assurance that he was in control of his own movements, no matter how small they seemed from the outside. The tallest boy finally spoke, his tone light, but with a thread of something else running through it. "What's in the coat, huh?" It was meant to sound casual, teasing, but the words carried that subtle hitch of someone asking, because they needed to know. The others gave a quick laugh, more out of habit than amusement, their eyes flicking to him and then back to Daniel. Daniel didn't answer. He adjusted his stance by the smallest margin, his boots scraping softly against the grit of the curb, and kept his head angled toward the street as though listening for something beyond them. The bus's engine note grew louder in the distance, the sound carrying along the cold air. The boys waited for him to do something, anything, to break the tension. When he didn't, the pause deepened, filling the space between them with something heavier than the easy cruelty they had started with. They were still smirking, still playing their parts, but underneath it, The first crack of uncertainty had appeared, faint but unmistakable. Daniel could feel it, and he knew from experience that once a moment like this began to shift, it was hard to shift it back. The sound was small, but it carried. A crisp, metallic click that seemed to slice through the thin layer of mockery still clinging to the air. It wasn't loud enough to draw the attention of the people half a block away, but to the three boys standing in front of him, it might as well have been the crack of a whip. The tallest one froze mid-smirk, his hand still gripping the white cane, though now hung lower, the tip resting awkwardly against his shoe. The second boy's eyes flicked toward Daniel's coat, his jaw tightening just enough to betray that the sound had registered as something unfamiliar and unsettling. The third boy, the youngest of the group, shifted his weight and took a step backward without even realizing he had done it. His sneakers scraped against the pavement, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. He wasn't grinning anymore. The click had pulled something instinctive out of him, a quiet recognition that sometimes a sound could mean more than any words. Daniel didn't move after that. His hand remained inside the coat, fingers lightly curled, the position casual but undeniably deliberate. He stood with the same stillness he had maintained since they'd first taken his cane, his head angled slightly toward the street as if listening to the flow of traffic. But the space between him and the boys had shifted. It wasn't his distance measured in feet. It was the kind that happens when confidence begins to leak away, drop by drop. The wind carried the faint scent of diesel from the approaching bus, blending with the smell of damp leaves and morning air. Somewhere down the block, a car door slammed, but here, at the bus stop, the stillness held. The click replayed itself in the boys' minds, each of them trying to decide whether it was nothing at all or something they should take seriously. None of them wanted to be the first to break the silence and risk finding out. The tallest one tried to recover, forcing a laugh that came out thinner than before. "What's that supposed to be? You think that's going to scare us?" His voice wavered on the last word, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for his friends to hear. They didn't back him up with laughter this time. The youngest kept glancing at Daniel's coat, his lips pressing into a thin line, as if he was waiting for some explanation that wasn't coming. Across the street, the young woman had stopped pretending she wasn't watching. Her grocery bag was at her feet now, both hands free, eyes locked on the small group. She was far enough away that she couldn't hear the details, but the change in the boy's posture was clear even from her side of the road. Daniel let the silence breathe, giving it room to work. In his life, he'd learned that sometimes people feared what they didn't understand far more than what they did. A click could be a lighter, a pen, a folding knife, or something else entirely, and the less you revealed, the more the mind worked to fill in the blanks. The bus's engine growled closer, the sound reverberating off the narrow street. The boys' eyes darted toward it, then back to Daniel, their timing no longer in sync. They were no longer united in their laughter or their mockery. Each seemed to be calculating something different, measuring risk in their own way. Daniel shifted slightly, just enough for the coat fabric to rustle against his hand. It was a small movement, but it made the tallest boy's grip on the cane falter. His fingers loosened, and the white shaft wobbled before settling again. No one spoke. The click lingered between them, its sharpness refusing to fade into the background noise. For the first time that morning, Daniel felt the balance tip. They weren't looking at him the way they had before, and he knew they were starting to understand, though not fully, that this was not the kind of game they had thought it was. Daniel's hand emerged from the deep fold of his coat, slow and steady, the movement deliberate enough that the boys' eyes followed it without blinking. What they saw was not what they expected. Resting in his weathered palm was a small military medal, its once bright ribbon now softened and frayed with age. The gold edges caught the thin morning light, sending a muted glint across the cracked sidewalk. The metal wasn't polished to perfection. It had been handled too many times, carried too far, through places the boys couldn't begin to imagine. The tallest boy's mouth opened slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no words came out. He had been ready for something else, something that matched the sound of the click they'd just heard. Instead, the object in Daniel's hand seemed out of place, ordinary to anyone who didn't know its weight, extraordinary to anyone who did. The youngest boy squinted at it, his brows drawing together as he tried to place the shape, the engraved details, the ribbon's faded stripes. Daniel held it low, at the level of his cane, so they could see without him raising his hand like a trophy. His fingers curled lightly around the metal, not gripping it with possession, but cradling it as one might hold a memory. The sun caught the faint scratches in the surface, each one a mark from years of being carried through heat, sand, rain, and ice. He said nothing for a moment, letting their eyes trace over it, letting the air between them shift once more. The sound of the town, distant traffic, the hum of a refrigerator from the corner store, seemed to fall back again, replaced by the faint weight of unasked questions. The young woman across the street leaned forward slightly, her lips parting as she caught the glint of gold in his hand. She didn't need to cross over to understand that this was no casual trinket. Finally, Daniel tilted his head in their direction, his voice even, steady, carrying just enough of them to hear. "This isn't about fear," he said quietly. "It's about what people carry." The words didn't have the edge of a threat or the sharpness of anger. They landed differently, soft, but anchored in something unmovable. The tallest boy blinked, glancing briefly at his friends, then back at the metal. His posture had lost its earlier swagger. He still held the cane, but now it hung limply by his side, almost forgotten. The boy to his left shifted his weight, kicking lightly at the pavement with the toe of his sneaker, his gaze darting between Daniel's face and the object in his palm. Daniel rotated the metal slightly, just enough for them to see the inscription along its back. The letters were small, worn from time, but still legible. To him, they were more than just letters. They were a thread that ran through years of service, through long nights, through losses that had never made it into any speech or ceremony. He didn't need to explain the history behind it for the air to grow heavier with the realization that it represented something real, something that demanded a level of respect the boys had not considered giving. The wind lifted the ribbon gently, brushing it against his coat before letting it fall back into place. Daniel's hand remained steady, his thumb resting on the edge as though he knew every curve and dent by memory alone. He had carried this metal in pockets across continents, through times when it meant survival and times when it meant remembering those who hadn't made it home. One of the boys finally spoke, but his voice had lost its earlier volume. "What's it for?" he asked, though it sounded less like a challenge and more like the first genuine question of the morning. Daniel's expression didn't change, but he turned the metal slightly so the light caught its surface again. He didn't give them the full story, not yet. Instead, he let the question hang in the air, knowing that sometimes the weight of a thing was felt more in the silence that followed than in the telling itself. The bus was closer now, the rumble of its engine beginning to press against the quiet, but the small circle at the bus stop remained still. The cane, the metal, the space between them, none of it looked like it had just minutes before. The sunlight caught on the metal again, sending a faint shimmer across its worn surface as it swayed gently in Daniel's hand. The movement was small, barely perceptible, yet it drew the eyes of all three boys as if something invisible tethered them to it. Their earlier bravado seemed to falter under the quiet rhythm of that swing. It was no longer just an object in a blind man's hand. It had become something they couldn't immediately name, a symbol whose meaning they felt more than understood. The tallest one, still holding Daniel's cane, shifted his grip. A few minutes ago, he had brandished it like a prop, his laughter loud enough to draw glances from strangers. Now, the wooden shaft hung loose against his leg, the weight of it suddenly awkward, as though it didn't belong to him. His eyes darted between Daniel's still face and the glinting metal, unsure which was more unsettling, the calm or the mystery. The second boy, the one with the baseball cap pulled low, tried to mask his unease with a smirk that never quite formed. His gaze fixed on the metal, his head tilting slightly, the way someone might study a puzzle missing its last piece. He wasn't looking for humor anymore. He was searching for context, for some anchor to explain why the sight of it made his stomach tighten. Daniel's head was turned just enough toward them that they could feel his attention, even if his eyes, hidden behind dark glasses, didn't meet theirs. He didn't speak. The absence of his voice was more pointed than any words he could have chosen. The metal swayed once more, the ribbon twisting slightly before settling back into place. The sound of the bus's distant approach blended with the light rustle of the ribbon against his coat. The youngest boy, barely 16, found his jaw tightening without realizing it. The metal reminded him of something he had seen once in his grandfather's drawer. kept in a small box alongside black and white photographs and letters with creased edges. He didn't know what it was called or even what it meant, but he remembered the way his grandfather had looked at it, like it carried more than metal should. That memory stirred in him now, leaving him unsure whether to speak or keep quiet. The air between them felt heavier. The laughter, once quick to rise, had drained away completely, replaced by a fragile kind of stillness. The passers-by who had ignored the earlier scene glanced over again, sensing the change. Some slowed their pace, as if waiting to see what would happen next, but no one stepped closer. The young woman across the street was still watching, her eyes locked on Daniel's hand. Daniel let the metal turn slightly, the engraved edge catching the light before it swung back. The motion was steady, unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. His stance hadn't changed, feet planted evenly on the cracked sidewalk, shoulders square beneath the weight of the old army coat. There was no tension in his posture, only a quiet authority that seemed to expand with each passing second. The tallest boy swallowed and shifted his weight. His friends noticed a movement, but said nothing. They were beginning to understand that the man in front of them wasn't fragile, wasn't to be pitied. There was something about him, a gravity that didn't need force to be felt. The metal in its slow arc was a reminder that his life stretched back far beyond this street corner, into experiences they could not imagine, much less mock. The youngest boy glanced at the others, then back to Daniel. He didn't want to be the first to break the silence, but it was clear they all felt the same pull. The bravado that brought them together in their mockery had dissolved, replaced by an unease that kept them rooted in place. Daniel's fingers curled slightly around the metal, still letting it hang but no longer letting it swing. He stood there, still as the bus grew louder in the distance, its brakes beginning to whine as it neared the stop. In that moment, the street seemed to narrow around them, the chatter of the town fading until it was only the faint clink of metal and the sound of approaching wheels. Whatever they had expected to see when they first laughed at him, this was not it. The bus hissed to a stop a short distance away, but Daniel didn't turn toward it. His hand remained steady, the metal glinting faintly against the worn fabric of his coat. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with a tone that cut through the cool morning air and left no space for interruption. It was the kind of voice that carried without effort, one shaped by years of being obeyed, not because of fear, but because of the certainty it held. "Put it down," he said, each word deliberate, his tone flat yet unyielding. The sound of it was unlike anything the boys had heard from him before. It was not a request, and it was not angry. It was an order, one that assumed compliance before any resistance could take root. The tallest boy, still gripping the cane, froze. The mocking grin that played on his face earlier vanished, replaced by something harder to name, something caught between hesitation and the instinct to obey. Daniel didn't move toward them. He didn't need to. His voice carried a weight that seemed to close the distance on its own. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, lifting the metal slightly so that it caught the sunlight again. None of them answered. He let the silence stretch, his head tilting just enough to let them know he was listening for their response. "It's not decoration," he continued. "It's not something you wear to look important." His tone was steady, controlled, but beneath it was an undercurrent of steel, as if every syllable had been sharpened before it left his mouth. The metal shifted in his hand again, turning slowly so that the boys could see the engraved emblem. This was earned in a place where men didn't get second chances, where you listened to the right voice, or you didn't come home at all. The youngest boy's eyes dropped to the sidewalk, tracing the cracks in the concrete. The second boy swallowed hard, glancing briefly at his friend's grip on the cane. The tallest one's knuckles had whitened without him realizing it, the smooth was suddenly feeling too heavy. "I've stood in streets a lot quieter than this," Daniel went on, his voice lowering further, forcing them to lean in without meaning to. "And I've stood in streets a lot louder. In both, I learned the same thing. When a man tells you to stop, you stop. Because sometimes stopping is the only thing keeping you alive." The bus door opened with a hydraulic groan, but Daniel didn't break his focus. Passengers stepped off, their shoes scuffing against the pavement, but the boys barely noticed. Every word Daniel spoke seemed to hold them in place, the sound of it drawing their attention tighter than any glare could. "You think this is about me being blind?" Daniel asked, tilted his chin slightly toward them. You think I can't see you? I've been seeing men like you my whole life. The only difference is the others weren't boys who could still choose who they wanted to be. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The authority in it came from somewhere far older and far deeper than the morning's encounter. It was the same tone that had once cut through chaos on a battlefield, the tone that had once made strangers trust him with their lives. It carried no trace of plea or weakness, only the weight of someone who had led, endured, and survived. The tallest boy finally lowered the cane, his grip loosening until it rested against his leg. He didn't hand it back yet, but the shift in his stance was clear. The second boy shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the metal again before falling to the ground. The youngest kept glancing between Daniel's face and the ribbon in his hand, as if trying to piece together a picture that was only now beginning to make sense. Daniel let the moment linger before speaking again, his tone unchanged. Now give it back. It wasn't a request. It was the same voice that had ordered men to move, to hold, to act in moments where hesitation meant loss. And in that stillness, with the bus idling and strangers pretending not to watch, it was enough to make even the boldest of them reconsider just how far they were willing to push. Daniel's fingers brushed the metal again, the ribbon soft from years of being handled, the edges of the metal warm now from his touch. His chin lowered slightly, as if the weight of it had pulled him inward, but his voice stayed steady. He didn't raise it for drama. He let the words form at their own pace, as though pulling them from a place he rarely visited. I was 20 years younger, he began, in a village you've never heard of, dust everywhere, so thick you could taste it. The heat made your clothes feel like they were melting into your skin. We were moving through a narrow street, between mud walls baked by the sun. Every doorway looked empty, but you couldn't trust that. You never could. He paused, not for effect, but because the image in his mind was so sharp it seemed to slow his breathing. The first shot came from somewhere above. We didn't see him. We didn't see any of them. Just the sound. Just the way the dust shifted around our boots when the bullets hit near us. 2 of my men went down before we could take cover. We had to drag them behind a wall that wasn't even high enough to hide us. The youngest boy's eyes lifted slightly, caught by the way Daniel spoke without hesitation. He wasn't telling a story to impress them. He was recounting something that had left its mark so deeply it could never fade. One of the wounded couldn't walk, Daniel continued, and the other was bleeding out fast. We didn't have time for clean bandages or waiting for a medic, so I tied one of my own shirts around the wound, pressed it until I felt my fingers go numb, and then I told the others we were moving. He turned his head slightly, as if facing a different direction now, though his dark glasses still hid his eyes. It was a blindfolded evacuation, not because I couldn't see yet, but because we had to keep our eyes covered from the sandstorm that had kicked up when the shooting started. You try carrying 2 men through a street you can't see, while rounds snap past your ears, while the air feels like it's on fire. You don't know where your next step will land, and you can't tell if the next sound will be your last. But you keep going. You keep going because stopping is an option. His hand closed loosely around the metal again. We reached the far side of the village, but the open ground at the extraction point was worse. No walls, no cover, just dirt and heat and the noise of gunfire that seemed to come from everywhere. I told him to run in bursts, 10 seconds at a time, then drop, then 10 more. Every second you were upright felt like an hour. But we made it, all of us. And when the helicopter lifted us out, I remember looking back. Couldn't see much, but I knew every man who'd started that day with me was on board. There was no pride in his tone when he finished. No swelling of the voice, no invitation for applause. Just a quiet finality, the kind that follows a memory you've carried for years and don't take out often. The metal shifted in his hand again, catching the light for a moment before settling. That's what this stands for, he said, his voice even. Not luck, not bravado, just doing what had to be done when there wasn't anyone else to do it. The tallest boy's posture changed almost imperceptibly, his shoulders not as rigid, his stance less defensive. The second boy's eyes flickered to the ground again, avoiding the weight of Daniel's words. The youngest kept looking at the metal, as if trying to picture the dust, the heat, and the blindfolded run through enemy fire. Daniel didn't press them. He let the memory hang there, as real to him now as it had been in 2009, knowing it spoke louder than anything else he could say. Daniel's fingers traced the edge of the metal, his thumb brushing over worn engraving, as though he could still feel the date had been pressed into his hand. His head tilted slightly, listening to the faint shuffle of the boys' feet on the sidewalk. Their breathing had changed. The easy rhythm of mockery was gone, replaced by something quieter, hesitation, maybe even uncertainty. He didn't smile, didn't try to soften his words. When he spoke again, it was with the same steady calm as before, the kind that carried weight without needing to raise a volume. "This," he said, letting the metal swing gently between his fingers, "isn't for what most people think soldiers get recognized for." He turned his wrist slightly so the light caught the faded gold. "I didn't earn it for taking lives. I earned it for saving them." The words landed with a heaviness that seemed to press the morning chill closer. A passing car slowed slightly, its driver glancing toward the bus stop before continuing on. Daniel continued, each sentence deliberate. That day in the village, it would have been easier, safer, to leave the wounded behind, to run for cover, get myself and the others out, and call it a loss. But the thing about wearing this uniform, once you made the choice to put on, you're not the most important person in the fight anymore. The men beside you are. He shifted his weight, the tip of his cane lightly touching the curb. We didn't have time to wait for orders. We didn't have time to think about what we might lose. We just moved. I carried one man on my back for half a mile. The other, we dragged between us on a piece of broken door we found leaning against the wall. The rounds kept coming. The heat was unbearable. My vision blurred from the grit in the air long before the blast took it entirely. But I wasn't thinking about me. For a moment, the sound of wind rushing through bare branches filled the silence. Daniel's fingers tightened on the metal, as though anchoring himself to the reason he still stood there. When we made it to the extraction point, I remember the look on their faces. Not relief of themselves, but disbelief that we were all still breathing. They told me later I'd done something impossible. I don't know about that. I only know there were two men who got to go home to their families because I didn't stop. That's why this was given to me. Not for how many enemies I fought, but for how many lives I refused to leave behind. The tallest boy, who had been holding the cane earlier, now shifted it from one hand to the other, looking down at it as though it had changed weight. Daniel could sense it without needing to see, the subtle shift in their posture, the way bravado had drained from the space between them. "You think about the medals you see in movies," Daniel went on, his voice lowering slightly. "You think they're about glory or about proving who's stronger. But the truth is, most of them are reminders. Reminders of the people you couldn't save and of the times you almost didn't make it yourself. This one," he let the medal hang still. "This one reminds me of a day when doing the right thing cost me my sight, but gave someone else their life. I've never regretted that trade." No one spoke. The hum of a far-off lawnmower carried faintly on the air, underscoring the stillness at the bus stop. Daniel didn't fill the quiet. He had said what he needed to say. Whether they understood it fully now or only years later didn't matter. He knew the truth had a way of echoing longer than cruelty ever could. The shift was almost imperceptible at first, a small tightening of the boy's jaw, the way his gaze stopped darting between the metal and Daniel's face, and instead fixed on him with sudden, unblinking attention. The other two were still restless, glancing at each other in silent question. But the tallest one stood still now, his shoulders lowering from their earlier cocky hunch. Something had landed. Daniel could feel it, the way you can feel the air change before a storm. The boy's fingers moved slightly against the white cane he still held, his grip loosening. His eyes traced Daniel's face, the set of his jaw beneath the neatly trimmed gray beard, the faint scars that lined his temple and disappeared on the frame of his dark glasses. Recognition wasn't immediate. More like a slow surfacing of memory that had been buried under layers of casual disregard. Daniel didn't push. He stood quietly, his hand resting against the edge of his old army coat, the metal glinting faintly in the morning light. The boy's voice, when it finally came, was quieter than before, stripped of the easy arrogance that had flavored every word earlier. "Daniel Cross?" he asked, not as a challenge, but almost as if confirming something to himself. Daniel turned his head slightly toward the sound, registering the change in tone. "That's right." The boy swallowed, a subtle shift in his throat, and for the first time since this exchange began, he seemed unsure of his footing. "My brother, I think he knew you, served with you, maybe." His voice faltered, as though the pieces of the memory were still falling into place. "He told me once about a guy, went blind in Afghanistan, but carried 2 men out under fire. Said he'd never met anyone tougher. Said the name was Cross." The other 2 boys looked at him now, their smirks gone, replaced by something closer to curiosity tinged with unease. One of them asked under his breath, "Your brother's in the army, right?" The tallest nodded slowly, his gaze still on Daniel. "Marines," he said, his voice steadying but softer. "He doesn't talk about it much. But he talked about that. Said it was the kind of thing that sticks with you." Daniel let the quiet hang for a moment, not to prolong their discomfort, but to let the truth settle into the space between them. "Your brother's name?" he asked. "Eli," the boy replied quickly. "Eli Carver." Daniel's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but enough to carry a note of recognition. "Carver. Yeah, I remember him. Good man. Brave. He was there that day." Something shifted in the boy's stance. His grip on the cane loosened further until he looked down at it, as though suddenly aware of the disrespect and holding it like a trophy. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he extended it back toward Daniel. "I didn't know," he muttered, the words awkward but sincere. Daniel reached out and took the cane, the familiar weight settling comfortably in his hand once more. He tapped the curb lightly, the sound sharp and steady. "Most people don't," he said, "and that's all right. You don't owe me anything, but you do owe your brother the same respect you'd want for yourself." The boy nodded, a faint redness coloring his face. The other 2 remained quiet, their earlier energy dissipated into something heavier. Daniel sensed a change, but didn't gloat over it. Recognition, he knew, was not about making someone feel small. It was about making them see. The bus could be heard in the distance now, its low rumble growing closer. But for the moment, the world at the bus stop was still, the air thick with the weight of a connection made where moments earlier there had been only mockery. It came out barely above a whisper, more reflex than conviction, the kind of apology tossed out when silence feels heavier than words. The smallest of the 3 boys, the one who had been laughing the loudest earlier, stared down at his sneakers as he mumbled it. "Sorry," he said, the word almost swallowed by the sound of the approaching bus. His hands were buried deep in the pockets of his hoodie, shoulders hunched like he was bracing against a cold wind. Daniel didn't move right away. He had learned long ago that rushing to fill the air often let people escape the weight of what they'd just said. Instead, he stood quietly, feeling the subtle tremor in the earth as the bus rolled closer along the asphalt, his cane resting lightly against his leg. The metal still hung from his other hand, its ribbon catching the morning light in thin glints of red, white, and blue. "Do you know what you're apologizing for?" Daniel asked finally, his voice calm and even. The boy glanced up quickly, surprised by the question, then looked away again. "For you know messing with you," he muttered. "That's part of it," Daniel said. His tone carried no sharpness, but neither did it offer an easy way out. "But it's not just about me. It's about what you think it means to see someone standing still, to think they're easy to laugh at because they don't push back right away. It's about assuming you know someone's worth before you even know their name." The boy's jaw shifted like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. The tallest one, still quiet from his earlier realization, glanced at him as if urging him to respond. The smallest only dug his hands deeper into his pockets and rocked on his heels. Daniel took a slow breath. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought strength was about being the loudest, the fastest, the one who could stand tallest in a fight. Took me years and some hard lessons to learn that strength is about what you carry without anyone seeing it, the weight you choose to bear so someone else doesn't have to." The other 2 shifted uneasily. The tallest boy kept his eyes on Daniel, but the middle one, the one who had cheered when the cane was snatched, looked off toward the street, suddenly fascinated by a crack in the pavement. The smallest cleared his throat, his voice a little louder this time. I mean, I wasn't thinking, he said. No, Daniel replied. You weren't. And that's what I want you to remember next time. To think before you act. Because the truth is, you don't know how close you might come to hurting someone who's already had to fight harder than you can imagine. The bus was close enough now that its brakes gave a faint hiss as it slowed for the upcoming stop. Daniel tucked the metal back inside his coat, his hand brushing over the worn fabric before slipping to his side. He tapped his cane once, twice, the sound sharp and clear. I'll take your apology, he said, turning his head toward the smallest boy. But I hope one day you'll make it mean something. There was no reply, only the sound of the bus pulling up, the doors folding open with a metallic groan. Daniel stepped forward toward the curb, the cane leading, the air around him cooler now, but strangely lighter. As he mounted the first step, he could feel the three of them watching him, their earlier laughter replaced by something quieter, heavier. He didn't need to see their faces to know the moment had settled deep, whether they admitted it or not. And maybe, just maybe, the next time they felt that urge to mock, they would remember this morning and choose differently. The low rumble of the engine grew steadily louder, a steady thrum beneath the crisp morning air. The bus rounded the corner, its headlights cutting across the street in pale beams, reflecting faintly off the wet pavement. Daniel could hear the distinct change in the sound of the tires as they slowed, the hiss of the brakes releasing a brief cloud of steam in the cold. He shifted his weight slightly, the cane still absent from his hand. The tallest boy, the one still holding like an awkward relic from a game that had ended too abruptly, seemed rooted to the spot. His grip had loosened, the mockery gone from his posture. Daniel turned his head toward him with unhurried precision. No words passed between them, just a soft tap of the cane's tip against the asphalt as the boy extended it forward. Daniel's fingers closed around it, firm and certain, the familiar balance of it settling instantly into place. He gave no nod, no acknowledgement beyond that brief contact, then stepped past the boy as if the incident had been nothing more than an interruption in a long morning. The bus eased up to the stop with a groan, the folding doors yawning open. A faint scent of diesel mingled with the sharper tang of cold air, drifting into the space between the curb and the open doors. Daniel's boots made a muted thud against the concrete as he approached, the steady rhythm of the cane leading him in perfect time. The young woman across the street still stood frozen, her hesitation holding her in place even now. She watched the scene play out like an observer to a photograph coming into focus, unable to decide if she had just witnessed a confrontation or a lesson. Behind Daniel, the three teens lingered. None of them spoke. Their earlier energy had drained away, replaced by a silence that seemed to cling to the edges of the air. The smallest boy shifted his stance, the scuff of his shoe on the pavement loud in the absence of laughter. The middle one avoided looking at anyone, eyes locked instead on the open bus door, as though staring long enough might make Daniel disappear into it. Daniel placed one hand on the metal rail of the bus's entryway. The driver, a stocky man in his 40s, glanced at him and then at the group of boys standing a few feet back. His brow furrowed slightly, as if piecing together a scene he had only caught the tail end of. Daniel didn't offer an explanation. He never did. Instead, he lifted one boot to the first step, feeling for its exact edge before bringing his other foot up. The cane tapped once on the step above, guiding him as naturally as breath. The boys watched him climb, the slow and deliberate movement somehow more unsettling than if he'd stormed off in anger. Each step was measured, unshaken, as though reclaiming the cane had also reclaimed the pace of the day. At the top, Daniel paused, not because he needed to, but because he could. His head turned slightly, angled toward the sound of their breaths and the faint shuffle of their sneakers. The pause was brief, yet long enough for them to know it was intentional. Then, without a single word, he turned back toward the bus interior and moved to an empty seat near the front. The driver closed the doors with a hydraulic sigh. As the bus pulled away, the reflection of the three boys lingered in the smudged glass for just a moment before fading into the blur of the street. Daniel rested his cane lightly against his knee, the metal still tucked deep inside his coat. Outside, the town continued as though nothing had happened. Cars rolling past, pedestrians carrying coffee cups and grocery bags, the wind tugging gently at the leaves scattered across the sidewalk. But for the boys left behind at the stop, the sound of the bus engine receding into the distance carried more weight than the laughter they had started with. It left them standing in the cold, unsure what exactly had shifted, only that it had. The driver leaned forward slightly as Daniel stepped up into the bus, his voice carrying the warmth of recognition. "Morning, Sergeant Cross," he said, his tone both casual and respectful, as though the greeting had been spoken countless times before. There was no hesitation in his voice, no pity or forced cheer, only the steady acknowledgement of someone who knew the man before him was more than what met the eye. Daniel inclined his head in the driver's direction, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Morning, Hank," he replied, his voice low but even, as if the weight of the morning's events hadn't touched him at all. Hank shifted his gaze briefly toward the boys still standing on the sidewalk. His eyes narrowed slightly, the flicker of understanding passing over his face, but he said nothing to them. He knew Daniel's way, how he handled people, how he could make an impact without raising his voice. Hank had learned long ago that there was little use in intervening when Daniel was present. Whatever needed to be said or done would be handled in its own time. Daniel found his usual seat in the second row on the right, a spot he favored for the balance between proximity to the door and the comfort of a predictable space. The cane rested across his knees, and the faint scent of worn canvas and cold air still clung to his army coat. The bus felt warm compared to the sharp bite of the morning, the hum of the heater under the seats filling the quiet space between the driver's steady breathing and the occasional rattle of loose metal as the bus idled. Outside, the reflection of the three boys in the large side window remained for a moment longer. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by an uneasy stillness. The tallest boy, still standing slightly apart from the others, glanced at the bus door as though considering something unsaid. His shoulders shifted uncomfortably, hands buried in his pockets. The young woman across the street was still watching, her gaze moving between Daniel and the boys, the uncertainty etched into her expression. She, too, seemed to understand that something had shifted, though she might never know exactly what. Hank eased the bus into gear, the hiss of the brakes releasing a puff of steam that drifted toward the curb. The vehicle began to roll forward, the vibration of the engine carrying through the floor beneath Daniel's boots. As the bus pulled away from the stop, Hank's eyes flicked briefly to the mirror, taking in the fading figure behind them. He knew better than to ask Daniel about what had happened, but the look in the older man's posture told him enough. There was no anger there, only the quiet certainty of someone who had once faced far greater threats than three restless boys on a cold morning. Daniel sat with his hands folded loosely on the cane, his head turned slightly toward the window. Though his eyes could not see the familiar streets rolling past, he could track the turns and stops by sound alone. The change in engine pitch, the sway of the bus, the faint echoes of footsteps outside as people hurried about their routines. He had traveled this route enough to know it like an old marching path, each landmark marked not by sight, but by the memory of movement. The bus continued on, the warm air inside carrying a faint scent of fuel mixed with the morning's damp chill. Passengers boarded at the next stop, offering nods to Hank, a few glances toward Daniel. Some knew him, some didn't, but his presence carried an unspoken weight all the same. In the quiet between stops, Daniel let the hum of the engine fill the space where most people might speak. Silence, he'd learned, often carried more than words ever could. By the time the bus turned onto the main road out of the neighborhood, the boys were no longer in sight, swallowed by the curve of the street and the steady motion of the day moving on. Daniel adjusted his grip on the cane just slightly, as if reaffirming its familiar balance in his hands. Hank's voice broke the quiet again, not to ask questions, but to say something simple and steady. "Same stop as usual, Sergeant?" Daniel nodded once, the small smile returning to his face. "Same as usual." From her position across the street, the young woman kept her gaze locked on the bus as it pulled away from the curb. The camera on her phone followed the scene with a steady hand, her breath visible in short white puffs in the cold air. She had hesitated earlier, rooted to the spot by uncertainty, but now her fingers moved quickly, unlocking the screen and swiping to record, as if she was afraid she might lose the final fragments of what had just unfolded. The device captured the backs of the three boys standing in awkward silence, the reflection of their figures shrinking in the bus's side windows, and the faint shadow of Daniel in his seat, upright, composed, and unmoved by the spectacle they had tried to create. She held the phone higher for a moment, angling it to catch the small but telling details. The way the tallest boy shifted his stance, his weight rolling from one foot to the other. The way the smallest one rubbed the back of his neck, as though trying to ease a tension he couldn't name. The stillness of the third, who kept his head down, hands buried deep in his hoodie pocket. The bus's tail lights glowed red against the gray morning, bright for a moment before the vehicle turned onto the main road and vanished from view. The woman lowered the phone slightly, but she didn't stop recording. Instead, she let the frame linger on the boys, the uncomfortable quiet that hung over them replacing the laughter she'd heard when she first noticed the group. Her other hand tightened on the strap of her bag, the leather creaking faintly under her grip. She wasn't sure yet why she was filming, whether it was to have evidence of something had gone wrong or to preserve the shift in atmosphere, the way a small, unseen turning point could alter a person's posture. Behind her, the low hum of a delivery truck approached, but she stayed focused on the street in front of her. The bus was gone now, leaving only the thin lines of condensation from its exhaust and the faint echo of its brakes in the air. The boys began to move slowly, their energy drained, their conversation muted to brief exchanges she couldn't hear from across the street. She kept the camera trained on them until they finally walked away in different directions, no longer a group, just three individuals with their own hurried paths. When they disappeared from sight, she stopped the recording. The phone screen reflected her face for a moment. Sharp lines from the cold, eyes slightly narrowed from concentration. She replayed the last seconds, the grainy image of Daniel boarding the bus, the driver greeting him with a nod, and a quiet reclaiming of his seat. There was something about it that held her attention, something that didn't fit neatly into the usual rhythms of a small-town morning. Slipping the phone into her coat pocket, she started walking toward the bus stop. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she moved with a kind of focus, scanning the pavement as if she might find some physical trace of the encounter. The stop itself was empty now, just a metal pole with a faded schedule and a thin layer of frost on the concrete around it. She stood there for a moment, picturing the way Daniel had tapped his cane, the slow precision of each movement, the way his stillness had carried more weight than any raised voice could have. She pulled the phone out again, scrolling through her contacts before pausing on a name she hadn't called in years. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then moved away. Not yet. Instead, she opened her messages and saved the video to a separate folder. She didn't know if she'd ever share it, but she knew it wasn't something to delete. There was a sense that the moment meant more than what she had seen, and that meaning might become clear later, whether for her, for the boys, or for someone else entirely. Turning away from the bus stop, she headed down the sidewalk toward her own destination. The frost crunched under her boots, the street quiet except for the faint echo of traffic in the distance. The phone felt heavier in her pocket now, not because of its weight, but because of what it held. By the time the sun had dipped below the rooftops, the small New England town was already wrapped in the muted stillness of an early autumn evening. Streetlights flickered on, casting soft halos across damp pavement. Inside a second-floor apartment overlooking Main Street, the young woman from that morning sat at her kitchen table, the phone resting in front of her. She had watched the clip 3 times already, each time noticing something different. The subtle tilt of Daniel's head as he listened, the momentary hesitation in the tallest boy's stance, the way the metal caught a brief flash of sunlight. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she thought about what to do with it. Posting something like this wasn't a decision she made lightly. She didn't want to turn Daniel into a spectacle, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened wasn't something to keep hidden. It wasn't about humiliating the boys either. Their faces were just shadows in the video, their voices mostly lost under the noise of the street. What mattered was a quiet shift, the way a man could take control of a situation without shouting, without threats, just the way of his presence and a single piece of his history in the palm of his hand. She opened her social media app, her thumb pausing before tapping New Post. The video filled the screen and she typed the caption slowly, deliberately. Blind vet schools 3 bullies without raising his voice. The words felt direct, but not cruel. They gave a hint of what happened without telling the whole story, leaving enough space for the viewer, to see it for themselves. She set the privacy to public, hesitated for one last moment, then pressed post. For a while, nothing happened. She left the phone on the table and busied herself with making tea, the quiet hum of the kettle filling the small apartment. By the time she returned with a mug in hand, there were already a handful of notifications, a few likes, a couple of comments from people she didn't know. She clicked one and read, "Wow, that man's a legend." Another, "This is how you handle things. Respect." Over the next hour, the numbers began to climb. The video was short enough to watch in under a minute, but long enough to capture the entire arc of the moment. The taunts, the pause, the click of the metal case, the stillness of Daniel's voice as he spoke. People share it quickly, tagging friends and family, adding their own captions. Every kid needs to see this. Lesson in respect right here. You never know who you're dealing with. Some began asking questions in the comments. Who was he? What medal was that? Did anyone know his story? A few older veterans chimed in, recognizing the shape of the medal, explaining its significance to those who didn't. One wrote, "That's the Bronze Star. You don't get that for nothing." Another posted, "Met Daniel Cross once at a community event years back. Humble guy. Never talked about himself unless you asked the right questions." By the time the clock on her stove read 9 o'clock, the post had reached thousands. A local news outlet shared it with their own headline, "Veterans' calm response to bullies goes viral." In the flood of reactions, there were stories from strangers about their own encounters with veterans, quiet moments of dignity and unexpected strength. The comments became less about the boys in the video and more about the man they had underestimated. The young woman sat back, watching the numbers rise, but her mind wasn't on the view count. She kept thinking about Daniel himself. He didn't seem like the type to care about online attention, and she wondered how he'd feel if he knew the clip was spreading far beyond the small strip of sidewalk where it had been filmed. She decided she would tell him if she saw him again, maybe even show him the post. But part of her suspected he might just shrug, as though the whole thing were nothing more than another morning at the bus stop. Still, as she set her phone down for the night, she knew the image of him standing there, calm, steady, holding that medal, was already traveling into places and conversations far removed from the chill of that autumn morning. Within 2 days, the video had moved far beyond the boundaries of the small New England town. It slipped from one platform to another, carried by shares, reposts, and stitched reactions until it no longer belonged to the original uploader. People who had never seen the bus stop, never met Daniel Cross, and never felt the brittle bite of that particular autumn morning were now watching the quiet exchange unfold in their palms. The sound of the medal's case clicking open became a distinct marker in the clip, a moment people rewound and played again, marveling at how quickly the tone shifted without a single raised voice. On one site, it appeared with a caption in bold white letters against a black frame, "This is how you teach respect." On another, it was paired with a slow zoom onto Daniel's hand holding the medal, as text scrolled beneath explaining the history of the Bronze Star. Some versions cut away the opening taunts and began with the stillness of his posture, turning the clip into a study of restraint. Others extended it with commentary, voices over footage narrating what they thought was happening or speculating about the kind of man Daniel must be. In veteran groups online, the clip became a point of discussion. Posts flooded with comments from former service members who recognized not only the medal but the stance, the cadence of Daniel's voice in those few words. "That's command presence." One wrote, "You learn it when you've got lives depending on you." Another added, "Blind or not, I wouldn't cross a man like that." They debated whether they knew him, swapping fragments of memory. Someone thought they had served with him in Kandahar. Another swore he was part of a training unit in North Carolina before the injury. No one could say for certain, but the respect in their tone was clear. News outlets began picking it up, each reshaping the moment into their own narrative. A national morning show ran it under the headline, "Viral video shows veteran handling bullies with grace." A local radio host interviewed callers about the importance of respecting elders, the lines between discipline and humiliation, and what lessons young people should be learning from such encounters. The story became less about a single incident and more about what it represented, how composure, history, and quiet authority could stop cruelty in its tracks. Comment sections were filled with personal stories from viewers, memories of grandparents who had served, of teachers who commanded respect without ever raising their voices, of strangers whose calm steadied a tense moment. Many tagged friends with messages like, "Reminds me of your dad," or "This is exactly how Coach handled that fight back in high school." The clip became a mirror in which people saw parts of their own past reflected. In some corners of the internet, the boys in the video became the subject of speculation, faces blurred or shadowed. They were discussed in terms of what they might have learned, whether this was a sort of experience that would linger with them years later. A few defended them, pointing out how easy it was to make mistakes at that age and how rare it was to be given a lesson like this without lasting harm. Others were less forgiving, using the clip as a warning about the consequences of disrespect. By the end of the first week, the view count had passed 500,000. The algorithm kept feeding it to new audiences, pairing it with similar content, videos of quiet confrontations, moments of unexpected dignity, small acts that shifted the course of an interaction. The metal glinting in the autumn light became a recognizable image, almost a symbol, detached from the specific details of Daniel's life. People began to use stills from the video as profile pictures, overlays for quotes about respect, even as a centerpiece for digital art that imagined him standing in other settings, a battlefield, a parade, a memorial wall. Meanwhile, in the town where it all began, life went on at its usual pace. The bus still arrived on time. The air still carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and Daniel Cross still stood at the stop each morning with his cane and his coat. Whether he knew how far the video had traveled or how many people had seen it, no one could say. But in quiet corners of the internet and in living rooms thousands of miles away, strangers were still pressing play, watching that click, and feeling the air change in ways they couldn't quite put into words. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, when the pale winter light was already beginning to fade to the blinds of Daniel's small living room. He had just settled into his armchair, a mug of coffee cooling on the table beside him, the familiar weight of his folded cane resting against his leg. The phone's ring startled him slightly, not because it was loud, but because calls were rare these days. Most people who knew him preferred to drop by in person, and telemarketers usually hung up when they realized they were speaking to someone with little patience for sales pitches. He picked it up, the old rotary-style receiver fitting neatly against his ear. A warm voice introduced herself as Linda Matthews from the local Veterans Association. She spoke quickly, but with a tone that suggested she'd rehearsed this in her head before dialing. She explained that the association had seen the video. Of course, she said, they had recognized him right away, even before the medal came into view. The clip had sparked conversations not only among veterans, but in the wider community. Teachers had reached out to her, wanting to know if he might be willing to visit schools and share his perspective with students. Daniel listened without interrupting, his thumb absently tracing the worn edge of the coffee table. Linda went on to say that a local high school had asked specifically if he might speak at their upcoming assembly. She emphasized that it wasn't about the video alone. They wanted him to talk about service, respect, and the idea of standing one's ground without aggression. The principal believed the story could resonate with teenagers, especially after the incident at the bus stop had become something of an open secret in town. When she paused to ask if he would consider it, Daniel stayed quiet for a moment longer than most people would have. He had never been one for speeches. Even during his service, he preferred to address small groups, direct and to the point, rather than stand before a crowd. The thought of a gymnasium full of restless teenagers, all eyes on him, made his shoulders tense. But there was something in the way Linda phrased it. This wasn't about performance or public praise. It was about passing something on. He asked when it would be. She told him Friday morning, 2 days away. They could send a driver to pick him up, she said, and she assured him the school would make whatever arrangements he needed for accessibility. He could speak for as little or as long as he liked. She added with a small laugh that the students were curious to see the metal guy in person. Daniel's lips twitched into something almost like a smile. He hadn't asked for the attention, and he wasn't sure he wanted it, but he knew that avoiding it altogether wouldn't feel right either. If there was an opportunity to reach a few young people before they made choices they regret, maybe it was worth stepping into the spotlight for a short while. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll come." Linda's relief was audible. She promised to call again with the details, thanked him for agreeing, and said she would be at the school to greet him personally. When the call ended, the room felt unusually still. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the receiver clicking back into place. He thought about the bus stop, about the sharp wind that morning and the sudden shift in the boys' expressions. He thought about the metal resting now in a small wooden box on the shelf by the door, where it had been returned after years of sitting in a drawer. He wasn't planning to bring it to the assembly, not at first. But as the afternoon light slipped away and the air in the apartment cooled, he found himself glancing toward the box. Maybe he would take it after all, not as a prop, but as a reminder that respect, once earned, carried a weight that could outlast years of silence. The gym smelled faintly of floor polish and the lingering tang of yesterday's basketball practice. Rows of folding chairs had been set up in neat lines, filling the space where the court usually stood bare. The low hum of teenage voices bounced off the high walls, mixing with the occasional squeak of sneakers and the hollow echo of a microphone being tested. From a far side, a door opened, and Daniel stepped in with Linda Matthews by his side. His cane touched down softly, each tap against the polished floor sounding deliberate, the rhythm steady. Students turned their heads as he passed, some leaning toward friends a whisper, others watching in silence. A few phones were angled discreetly, ready to record, though whether for mockery or admiration was impossible to tell. The bright overhead lights reflected off the metal tip of his cane and caught the edge of his old army coat, worn but still neat. Linda guided him toward the small stage at the front, where a podium waited. The teens at the center of the bus stop incident were seated in the second row. They shifted uneasily when they saw him, their earlier bravado absent in the quiet weight of the room. One avoided his gaze entirely, staring fixedly at the floor. Another sat rigid, arms crossed, eyes following Daniel's movements with a mix of wariness and curiosity. The tallest of the three, the one who had taken his cane, watched him step onto the stage with a tight jaw and no smirk in sight. The gym doors closed with a soft thud, and the principal's voice came over the microphone, introducing Daniel as a local veteran and guest speaker. The words were formal but not stiff, outlining his service without embellishment, ending with a request that everyone give him their full attention. A polite round of applause followed, scattered at first and then growing enough to fill the space. Daniel reached the podium, resting one hand lightly on it while the other kept his cane upright beside him. He didn't start speaking right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch just long enough for the shifting in chairs to stop and the last whispers to fade. His posture was relaxed, but there was an unmistakable air control the way he stood, calm, centered, entirely present. When he finally began, his voice was low but carried clearly, each word finding its place in the large room. He didn't mention the bus stop. He didn't even hint at the video. Instead, he spoke about mornings in distant places, about learning to read the world without relying on sight, about what it meant to depend on others and have others depend on you. He described moments when calm under pressure had been the only thing between survival and disaster, and how that calm wasn't something you found. It was something you built day after day. As he talked, his hand slipped into his coat pocket, and he withdrew the small, worn medal. It caught the light, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. He held it up, not like a trophy, but like a piece of truth. He explained its story in simple terms, not romanticizing the moment that earned it, but making clear the value it represented. He told them it had nothing to do with fighting harder or longer than anyone else. It was about saving people who might not have made it otherwise. In the second row, the three boys sat still, their eyes fixed on him. Around them, the rest of the students seemed quieter than before, leaning forward slightly in their seats. No one was scrolling through their phone now. When Daniel finished, he didn't offer a closing lesson or moral. He simply returned the medal to his coat pocket, adjusted his stance, and waited. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the applause began, not scattered this time, but steady, filling the gym with sound that seemed to settle in the air even after it stopped. Linda stepped forward to guide him down from the stage. As they passed the second row, the tallest teen rose slightly from his seat, his voice barely audible over the shuffling chairs. "Sir," he said quietly, Daniel gave the smallest nod in acknowledgement, his cane tapping once more against the polished floor as they made their way toward the exit. Daniel stood with one hand resting lightly on the edge of the podium, the other keeping his cane upright by his side. The gym was quiet now, the kind of quiet that settles in when everyone realizes they are about to hear something they can't half listen to. He let the silence hold for a few breaths before speaking, his voice low but steady, carrying just enough weight to fill the space without effort. He began not with a story from a battlefield, but with a question. How many of them, he asked, had walked past someone and made an assumption based solely on what they saw? A few students raised tentative hands. Others shifted in their seats, unwilling to admit it aloud, but knowing the answer for themselves. He told them that dignity, real dignity, was not in how a person looked or in the titles they carried, but in how they conducted themselves when no one was watching and when no applause was expected. His tone was measured, not scolding, not pleading. He spoke about resilience in a way that was stripped of slogans. Resilience, he said, was not just bouncing back when things went wrong. It was getting up every single day, even when you didn't know if things would get better, and still choosing to carry yourself with self-respect. It was holding on to who you were when the world tried to chip away at it piece by piece. He told them about the unseen battles people fought, how the weight someone carried might not be visible at all. Some carried grief, some carried trauma, some carried guilt that no one could see. He explained that the cane in his hand wasn't just a tool for navigating sidewalks and stairs. It was a sign of battles fought long after he'd left the military. Losing his sight wasn't the hardest part, he said. Learning to live without the things people assumed defined him, that was a true fight. He moved from his own story to a broader truth, speaking of people they might encounter in their lives. The classmate who goes home to care for a sick parent, the quiet student who works late into the night to help support their family, the neighbor who never talked about their past because the memories are too sharp. He urged them to understand that every person they met was carrying something, and that respect should never depend on whether they could see the burden with their own eyes. His voice never wavered as he described moments in his life when dignity was all he had left to stand on. He told them about the day he first realized he was blind for good, the moment when the doctors told him there was no more light to save. He had been angry, humiliated, ready to shut himself away. But dignity meant walking out of that hospital with his head up, not because he felt strong, but because he refused to let others define his worth by what he had lost. The students leaned in now, their earlier restlessness gone. Even the scraping of a chair leg against the floor drew glances from classmates, as if no one wanted to miss a word. In the second row, the three boys who had stood at the bus stop that day watched with an intensity they hadn't shown before. The tallest boy's arms were no longer crossed. His hands were resting on his knees, his gaze locked on Daniel. Daniel ended not with a lesson wrapped in a neat bow, but with a truth that hung in the air. You don't get to choose all the battles you face, he said, but you do get to choose how you fight them. And sometimes the quietest fight is the one that changes everything. When he stepped back on the podium, the sound of applause rose again, fuller this time, not polite, but genuine. It rolled through the gym like a tide, and though Daniel couldn't see the faces turned toward him, he could feel the shift in the room, the small but undeniable change that comes when people see the world a little differently than they did before. For a moment after Daniel's final words, there was only stillness. It was as if the gym itself held its breath, the rows of students suspended between the weight of what they'd heard and the instinct to respond. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a pair of hands began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the sound caught, spread to the row beside it, then to the back, then to the far side of the gym until the applause swelled into something full and unrestrained. The echo was sharp against the high walls, filling every corner. Teachers at the edges of the room joined in, their expressions softened from their usual watchfulness. Even the principal, standing near the side entrance, allowed himself a small nod of approval as he clapped along. The noise was no longer just sound. It carried a warmth, a pulse of shared acknowledgement for something more than a speech. Daniel stood at the podium, his posture unchanging, his expression calm. He couldn't see the students rising from their seats, but he could hear the scrape of chair legs across the polished floor, the shuffle of feet as one by one. Then in small clusters, they stood. The applause deepened, became a rhythmic surge that rolled over him. He had been in rooms where applause was offered out of politeness, out of habit, but this had a different tone. He could feel it in his chest, a sincerity that couldn't be faked. In the second row, the three boys sat still at first. The one on the left stared down at the floor, his hands resting motionless on his thighs. The one in the middle glanced to the side, watching the students around him rise, his jaw tight. The tallest boy kept his eyes fixed on Daniel, his hands still clasped together. The applause swelled around them, and they were the only ones unmoving, the still point in a sea of motion. Seconds passed like that, long enough for the difference to be noticed, though no one said anything. Then the boy in the middle shifted, letting out a short breath as if he decided something in his own mind. He began to clap, tentatively at first, his palms barely touching, then with more conviction. The sound was swallowed by the noise of the room, but the movement was clear. The boy to his left followed, his eyes still low, but his hands coming together in a steady rhythm. The tallest boy hesitated the longest. His gaze never left Daniel, his brow furrowed as if there was more on his mind than applause. Finally, he lifted his hands and began to clap, slow, deliberate, and without the exaggerated force of someone trying to prove a point. It was almost thoughtful, as if each motion was weighed. From the stage, Daniel inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, not toward them specifically, but toward the room as a whole. He let the sound wash over him without breaking the steady calm in his voice when he finally spoke again, thanking them without ceremony. His words carried on a microphone in the same measured tone he'd used all along. The applause continued for several seconds more until it began to taper, the way a tide draws back from the shore. Students lowered themselves into their seats again, the shuffle and scrape of chairs returning in waves. The principal stepped forward, offering a few closing remarks. But the energy in the room didn't return to what had been before. The air felt heavier somehow, not with discomfort, but with the kind of quiet that comes after something important has been said. Daniel stepped away from the podium, guided by Linda toward the steps at the side of the stage. His cane tapped once against the wood before finding the floor again. As they passed the second row, the three boys remained seated but watched him closely. None spoke, but the absence of smirks or sideways glances said more than words could. Behind him, the sound of the gym settling back into its usual state was muted. He could still hear the faint echo of the applause in his mind, not as noise, but as a sign that at least for a moment, the message had reached its mark. The crowd had thinned, students spilling out into the hallways in loose clusters, their voices muted, as if the weight of the assembly still lingered. The sound of sneakers squeaking on the gym floor and the low hum of post-event chatter filled the space. Daniel stood near the edge of the stage, one hand resting lightly on his cane, the other on the arm of Linda, the Veterans Group coordinator who had guided him there. She was speaking quietly to the principal, arranging transport back to the community center, when a pause in the air drew Daniel's attention. Footsteps approached, not rushed but deliberate. The rhythm was uneven at first, like someone adjusting their pace while deciding whether to continue. Then they stopped a few feet away. Daniel angled his head slightly, his sightless eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his posture open but alert. Mr. Cross? The voice was low, uncertain. It belonged to the tallest of the three boys from the bus stop. The tone had none of the mocking edge from that morning weeks ago. It was softer, almost careful. Daniel gave a small nod, turning slightly toward the sound. "Yes," he said simply. There was a brief silence. The boy seemed to wrestle with his words before speaking again. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, for that day, at the bus stop." The last few words came out quickly, as if he feared he might lose the nerve if he lingered on them. Daniel didn't respond right away. He let the pause stretch, not to make the boy uncomfortable, but to let the words settle between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "You've thought about it since then?" The boy nodded, then realized the gesture wasn't enough. "Yeah, I have. My brother, he knew someone you served with. He told me what you did. Not just the medal thing, the rest of it." Daniel shifted his grip on the cane. The polish would warm under his hand. "And what did he tell you?" "That you save people." that you didn't have to do what you did, but you did it anyway. His voice dipped, the weight of the admission pulling it down. He said if you hadn't, some of them wouldn't be here, including him. Daniel let the words rest again, hearing the strain in the boy's tone. Your brother's alive, then. The boy nodded again before remembering himself. Yes, he is. Daniel's face remained calm, but his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beneath the words. I don't need an apology for what happened that day, he said after a moment, but I'll take it if it means you learned something from it. The boy's answer was quiet but certain. I did. Daniel extended his hand, not the one holding the cane, but his free one, palm open. There was the faintest hesitation before the boy's larger hand met his, the shake firm but not overdone. Daniel felt a slight tremor in the boy's grip, the kind that came when someone carried both nerves and sincerity. You'll have other moments in your life, Daniel said, his tone still even, when you'll have the choice to look at someone and see more than what's in front of you. Take them. The boy gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I will. Linda's voice came from just to the side, gently reminding Daniel that the car was waiting. The boy stepped back, releasing his hand, and Daniel turned toward the exit. The footsteps behind him faded into hum of the dispersing crowd. As they left the gym, the air outside felt sharper, the cool autumn breeze brushing against Daniel's face. He didn't look back. He couldn't. But he had the distinct sense that the boy was still standing there, watching, holding on to the moment in a way that might matter later. And that was enough. The boy lingered for a moment after Daniel turned toward the exit, his hands shifting in and out of his jacket pockets, as though he was weighing whether to speak again. The gym was nearly empty now, the last clusters of students disappearing through the double doors, their conversations trailing into the hallway. Only the faint echo of footsteps and the soft hum of the overhead lights remained. He took a step forward, then another, the sound of his sneakers quick against the polished floor. Mr. Cross, he called, just as Daniel reached the threshold with Linda guiding him. Daniel stopped, the faint tap of his cane against the tile marking his pause. He turned his head toward the sound of the boy's voice, the lenses of his dark glasses catching a faint reflection from the exit sign above the door. There's something I want to tell you, the boy said, his voice uneven, but no longer hesitant in the way it had been minutes before. Daniel's posture was patient, his chin tilted slightly as he waited. Go ahead. The boy drew in a breath, the kind people take before committing to something they can't easily take back. I'm going to join the volunteer corps. The one in town, the one that helps with the shelter, the food drives, all that. My brother's been telling me I should for a while, but I didn't listen, not until today. There was no dramatic flourish in the way he said it, no attempt to make it sound bigger than it was, just a quiet, matter-of-fact decision spoken aloud. Daniel's hand rested lightly on the top of his cane. And why today? The boy looked down for a moment, then back up as if the answer had always been simple. Because you're right. You don't know what people are carrying. I didn't think about that before. I didn't think about anyone but me. Daniel gave the smallest of nods. It's not about the size of what you do. It's about the choice to do it at all. His voice was steady, almost conversational, but there was a weight in it that made the words feel rooted. If you mean it, then mean it for more than today. I do, the boy said quickly, as though worried Daniel might doubt him. I already told my brother I'm signing up this weekend. I'm going to stick with it. Even if it's just sweeping floors or handing out boxes, I'll do it. Daniel's expression didn't change, but there was something in the slight lift of his head, as if he was letting the statement settle in the space between them. Then do it for the right reasons. Not for me. Not even for your brother. Do it because one day, someone you help won't know your name, and you'll be fine with that. The boy's mouth twitched into a faint, almost reluctant smile. Yeah, I think I get it. Linda glanced toward the door, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm, but she didn't hurry the moment. The gym smelled faintly of floor polish and the lingering warmth of too many people in one room. Outside, the muted sounds of cars passing on the street filtered in through the glass. The boy stepped forward, extending his hand again. Daniel found it without hesitation, their palms meeting in a handshake that felt firmer this time, less tentative. There was no awkwardness, just a quiet recognition that something had shifted. When they let go, Daniel inclined his head in a gesture that could have been approval or simply acknowledgement. "Then keep your word," he said, the words carrying neither threat nor softness, just a plain truth. "I will," the boy replied, and this time he sounded surer. As Daniel and Linda stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the boy remained in the doorway for a moment, watching them go. The bus stop wasn't far from here, and he knew he'd pass it again many times. But now, it would never just be a bus stop. It would be the place where a choice had been made. The streets were quiet in the late afternoon, the kind of stillness that came after the last of the school buses had passed and before the evening rush began. Daniel stepped down from the curb slowly, the tip of his cane tapping ahead of him with practiced rhythm. Each sound told him something. The hollow echo of the cane on concrete, the slight change in pitch when it passed over a drainage grate, the faint scuff of leaves tumbling along the sidewalk in the breeze. He had walked this route more times than he could count, yet each trip still carried its own small variations. In the right-hand pocket of his old army coat, the metal rested against the fabric lining, its metal cool against his fingers. He kept his hand there loosely, not gripping it, just letting it sit, the familiar weight a quiet presence. It had been years since he'd carried it this way. Most of the time, it stayed in a small box on the shelf in his apartment, out of sight, not because he was ashamed of it, but because he'd never needed it to remind himself of what it meant. Today had been different. The air was sharp with the scent of wood smoke from a nearby chimney, mixed with a faint tang of cold asphalt after last night's rain. Somewhere a block over, a dog barked, the sound bouncing off brick walls. Daniel could tell by the muffled chatter spilling from an open window that a family was gathered in their kitchen, the scrape of chairs and the clatter of dishes underscoring the conversation. It made him think briefly of his own family. Faces and voices from long ago, most now just memories he carried like the metal in his pocket, intact but separate from the world around him. His boots found the edge of the curb at the next corner, and he paused, listening. A car rolled past, tires hissing on the damp road. Then the quiet returned. He crossed, the cane leading him to the opposite sidewalk, where the concrete was cracked in places from winter frost. Each dip and ridge was mapped in his mind, the result of years of repetition, muscle memory guiding his steps. The route wound past a small park, where the benches stayed empty this time of year. He could hear the creak of the old swing set in the wind, the slow, uneven groan of rusted chains. It reminded him of the outposts overseas, where even in stillness, there was always something shifting, some sound carried on the air that you had to learn to read. He adjusted the collar of his coat against the wind, his gloved hand brushing briefly against the metal again. The image of the boy from the gym lingered, his voice steady when he promised to join the volunteer corps. Daniel knew better than to believe every promise made in a moment of emotion, but there had been something in the boy's tone, something unpolished but real. It wasn't for Daniel to decide whether the boy would keep his word. That would be proven in time. 2 blocks from his building, the faint aroma of baking bread reached him from a corner bakery. He didn't need to count the steps here. The smell alone told him where he was. The baker had offered more than once to deliver to his apartment, but Daniel preferred to walk. These streets, these sounds, the patterns of his route, they were a kind of quiet anchor. When he reached his building, the familiar groan of the front door hinges greeted him. He stepped inside, the warmth of the narrow hallway closing around him, the scent of old wood and faint traces of cleaning polish clinging to the air. His cane tapped lightly against the wall as he made his way to the second floor, each step measured but unhurried. Inside his apartment, he removed his coat and laid it across the back of the chair near the door. His fingers lingered in the pocket for a moment before withdrawing the metal. He set it on the small wooden table by the window, where the fading light caught the edges and made them glow faintly. Then he sat in his worn armchair, listening to the hum of the radiator and the distant sound of a train passing through town. The metal would stay out tonight, just for a while, before returning to his box. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder, and not just for him. Daniel moved slowly around the small apartment, the warmth from the radiator finally chasing away the chill that clung to him since the walk home. The faint ticking of the wall clock marked the passage of time in steady, unbroken beats. He reached for the medal on the table by the window, its ribbon slightly frayed, where years of careful handling had worn the edges smooth. The light from the setting sun slanted through the glass, catching on the gold surface and throwing a muted glint across the wall. Above the narrow bookshelf in the corner hung a single frame, a black and white photograph of his unit. 12 men stood in uneven rows, their uniforms dusty, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. Some smiled faintly for the camera. Others simply stared ahead, eyes steady, as though already thinking of the next day. Daniel's younger self was in the front row, before the glasses, before the cane, before the long recovery that followed. His hand found the hook beside the frame, and he hung the medal there, letting it rest against the wood of the frame so that it touched the corner of the photograph. He stepped back until the soles of his boots brushed against the worn rug, then lowered himself into the armchair. The springs creaked in familiar protest under his weight. From here, he could smell the faint trace of oil from the oiled leather of his cane leaning against the wall. Outside, the hum of traffic was distant, softened by the thick curtains he'd pulled halfway shut. The room felt insulated from the world, holding only the low hiss of the radiator and the occasional pop of its pipes as the heat cycled through. He let his head rest against the back of the chair, his hands folded loosely in his lap. The scene from earlier in the day replayed in pieces, not as a rush of events, but as still images. The boy's hesitation before speaking, the weight of the cane returned to his hand, the curious pause and the laughter when the medal first appeared. These moments came without the tension they had held at the bus stop. Now they seemed quiet, almost subdued, like echoes fading in an empty hall. His gaze drifted toward the window. He couldn't see the street beyond, but he could feel the shift in the air as evening settled in. Somewhere outside, a car door closed, followed by the muted murmur of voices heading inside. The scent of baking from the corner bakery had been replaced by the faint, sharp tang of cold air that seeped in through the edges of the glass. He thought of the boy's promise, not as something to measure or verify, but as a thread now tied to a larger fabric. Maybe it would hold, maybe it wouldn't, but the possibility itself mattered. He'd seen enough in his life to know that sometimes a single moment, if it landed in the right place, could outlast everything around it. The photograph on the wall seemed to lean slightly toward the metal now, the two connected not just by the hook and frame, but by the story between them. The men in the picture couldn't know what this day had been, but their faces reminded him why it mattered to carry certain things forward. The medal wasn't for display, it was for understanding, and that understanding had found an audience today in a place he hadn't expected. The room dimmed as the last of the daylight slipped away, replaced by the warm glow of the small lamp beside his chair. Daniel stayed seated, letting the silence settle in layers, not heavy but grounding. The metal caught the lamplight now, its reflection softer, less sharp than in the sun. He listened to the rhythm of the radiator, the occasional creak of the floorboards as the building adjusted to the cooling night. There was nothing left to do this evening. No urgent calls to return, no tasks to complete. Just the stillness, the warmth, and the quiet certainty that whatever had happened at that bus stop would ripple outward in ways he didn't need to see. Some lessons lived longer than the moment that sparked them, and this one, he felt sure, would find its way forward. He leaned back fully, his breath steady, his shoulders easing into the chair. Outside, the town moved on, unaware of the medal hanging on the wall or the story it carried. Inside, Daniel let the quiet hold him, content to let the day close without further thought. The lesson was already out there, and it no longer belonged to him alone.